Let's have another look at one of the great conflicts in the framework of the classical Queen's Gambit, the so-called hanging pawns on c5 and d5 that are not protected by other pawns, but could prove to be very dangerous weapon if supported by the entire power of Black's army. And one of the breakthroughs in the center, d5, d4, very often is fatal for White unless they're well prepared to counter this Black offensive. But on the other hand, these pawns could be weak if they are attacked from different directions by White pieces, and if White is well prepared for any advance, c5, c4 or d4. Worth mentioning that this position could also arise in other openings like Queen's Indian, which again shows that studying typical positions could be very useful, even if you are not employing this opening for your current repertoire. Anatoly Karpov was and still is one of the greatest experts in this area of chess knowledge. He played this position equally well with Black and White. He played with hanging pawns and against them, and always managed to find new interesting ideas to puzzle his opponents. And his opponents actually were players that challenged him in the World Championship matches. The featured game of this review is Korchnoi-Karpov Game 1 from their match in Merano, and there are two other games that will be introduced is the games from our first match in Moscow 84-85, game 25 and game 31, and one of them, game 31, could change entirely the development of chess history had Karpov won this game, which went so well for him in the beginning. So we start with c4, e6. I mean, Korchnoi played this move. Our games reached the same point through a different moves order. Karpov eventually started with knight f3 in that match. So, but we are gliding through the familiar terrain. So, worth mentioning, Karpov always played bishop a7. He never liked classical cardboard structure with Black. He specialized, in fact, playing this position with White, and won many convincing and very instructive games. But Korchnoi in the beginning just wanted to go for main line, and later he switched to cd4, d5, and bishop f4. So this position is reached, and despite it, just it's quite known framework and position that occurred many times before. It was the first time the Karpov and Korchnoi played it in their match, so that's why they had certain difficulty in managing it. Position looks simple, but in fact the simple positions are so complicated, and it requires a great knowledge, experience, and create a lot of creativity not to get lost in these intricate convolutions of these and maneuvers, because there is no clear target, there's no clear object where to move and how to move, and we have to remember that they both were just trying to invent some new ideas and new lines at a time. So Korchnoi took on c5, which proved to be a little bit inaccurate, because later on we should see Karpov played queen a4, which was absolutely best move in this position. And in fact, it played its role in reducing the popularity of the entire line. So we'll come back to this game a bit later. So, but in fact, Karpov himself took on c5, and after b takes c5, played rook c2 in game 25 on this match, already having an idea of attacking pawn on d5, having rook on d2, and attacking pawn on d5, also preventing d4, and preparing, his queen's advance on d3 or a4. So after rook c8, rook d2, queen b6, he played queen b3. Rook d8, rook b1, but here I just took on b3, and after a b3, knight b6, managed to hold the position. So you could see at the end of the game it was another quick draw, but there was a lot of tension. And you should trust me that in the long, endless matches as we played in 84, 85, this quick draw didn't mean just easy ride for any of us. It was it required a lot of preparation before the game and a lot of energy during the match. So that's why when we agreed on the draw, so in fact, quite amazing, because I didn't play knight e8, I played bishop e8 in this position. I think we just discovered a great misprint in the chess base. So it was bishop a8, and then after Karpov played knight g4, I played knight g8. No, knight a8 is too stupid. Yes. We have played many bad moves in this match, but not that bad. So it was bishop e8. So very natural, because black is trying to put bishop on a protected position, somehow hoping for d5, d4, and if suddenly white rook goes on a1, attacking the pawn, then black bishop could go back on d7. So just simply protecting this pawn. So after knight g4, knight g8, the game, the draw was agreed, because white couldn't excel more pressure on black's position. So Karpov probably was not satisfied with that, and then, as we know, he switched to 12, queen a4. But let's go back to Karpov-Korchnoi. So Korchnoi was a bit primitive, just trying to develop the queen on c2, and then bringing rook on d1, attacking these pawns. But it occurred that black had more than enough counter chances, and as we know, the hanging pawns could be a weakness, or it could be strengths. It was the latter in the above-mentioned game. So with passive move queen b1, one can hardly hope for an advantage. So Korchnoi probably hoped that he could continue his development, attacking pawn on d5, but eventually black pieces were nicely regrouped. So queen went on e6, and then after rook g3, knight h5, white eventually lost the bishop. So lost the bishop is not the correct word. It was an exchange, but it was a very comfortable exchange for black. So at move 19, just after making moves, we could just recognize that black dramatically improved the position. Now its queen is well positioned on e6. The one of the bishops is exchanged, and it's no longer the question about white pressing pawn on d5, but it's white protecting its position against d5, d4. So Korchnoi didn't manage actually to stop d4. He was probably having some hopes to increase the pressure on d5, and eventually, after a very dubious maneuver of bringing bishop on b1, that's hoping to play a3, bishop e2, he just managed to blunder the breakthrough in the center. And now, after ed4, bishop c6, white is simply losing, because queen c2 is met by bishop takes f3 and c takes d4. So after d4, Korchnoi had to go knight e2, but of course d3, f3 position is technically lost, and of course Karpov managed to deliver the final blow without any difficulty. So key moment, white was too complacent, forgot about the strengths of the hanging pawns, and was punished. d5, d4, and Korchnoi position collapsed. Now let's have a look at game 31, where Karpov played white and played very convincingly. So queen a4, a6, looks similar, dc5, exchange, rook d1, queen b6, now queen b3. So similar configuration, but Karpov, in fact, white didn't lose time for playing rook c2 and rook d2, as happened in game 25 that we just looked before at. So instead of exchanging on b3 and going for this very dull and endgame that was worse, because then it was difficult to resist white's pressure on c5 and d5, I play double edge queen a7, which I liked very much at that point. I prepared this move, and I saw that after having my queen on a7 and then rooks on d8 or e8 or c8 or then d8, I could manage to not only to protect these pawns, but also to prepare a potential breakthrough in the center. So it all looked nice, but then after bishop g3, rook a d8, that's an important move, because if you play somewhere else, for instance rook c8, then white knight goes on e5, so attacking white black structure, and also preparing bishop f3, which could be fatal for black, because then the pawn on d5 will be really weak. So rook a d8 was prepared, because after knight e5 now black could play d4, so that's our main hope. But then Karpov made a brilliant move. After rook a8, he simply played knight e1. So knight goes on e1, a very quiet move, typical for Karpov, and now there's a terrible threat, bishop f3. So bishop wants to go back to to appear on f3, attacking this d5 pawn, and it's very difficult for black to create any counterplay. I eventually tried to break through in the center, but it didn't work at all. And eventually this pawn proved to be too weak. And here, after bishop c4, rook f8, had Karpov played not queen d3 but knight f3, as far as I remember, my position could be hopeless, and the score was 5-0. Winning this game, Karpov could match Fischer's magic result 6-0 and to guarantee himself a place in immortality. So he didn't do it. He played queen d3, and I managed to escape by miracle by creating counter chances. And suddenly, at one point, Karpov discovered that it was no longer him playing for a win, but black is trying to create excellent counter chances. So I would say that even position at move 27 was still better for white, because white had an extra pawn, and every machine could show you that white still had some winning chances. But in a real game of chess, when clock was ticking, and that was the World Championship match, and Karpov just hoped to win the game comfortably, so he got very nervous and let black create counter chances. So of course queen c4 was a better move at move 28 instead of queen d3, because after h5, queen c4, I escaped or avoided a queen's exchange, thus keeping some pressure on the white's king side. And the final position, where the draw was agreed, was extremely complicated, but black had perfectly nice and perfectly comfortable compensation for the pawn. So again, it's more of the chess history, it has nothing to do with the history of hanging pawns, but I hope these three games played at the highest level could give you some impressions how this controversial issue of hanging pawns can be handled, both from white and the black sides.